The heroine, caught in the gang war, is struggling for survival all the time. When she and her friends are hiding in the manor to avoid danger, their seemingly peaceful life is shattered by a sudden attack. Friends are injured, and the heroine is kidnapped. During the kidnapping, she encounters Darius, who once hurt her. Faced with past pains and present dangers, how will the heroine make her choice? Chapter 29. We spent the next 5 days confined within the cabin, each day a new challenge to keep our minds off the looming troubles. Our time was filled with an endless stream of movies, while Seth and Bella, our resident culinary experts, showcased their cooking skills by producing mouth-watering dishes that momentarily distracted us from our predicament. Occasionally, we had visitors. Vincent, Scarlet, and Levi graced us with their presence twice during our stay. Their visits served a dual purpose: to reintroduce themselves and to provide some much-needed company. I couldn't help but notice the palpable tension that filled the room when Vincent first entered, his infamous reputation preceding him. However, Xavier, ever the capable leader, swiftly intervened to clarify Vincent's true nature and the misunderstood origins of his notoriety. Although Elliot remained skeptical, his willingness to give Vincent a chance stemmed from the knowledge that Vincent was the right-hand man to Xavier, the only person with the potential to ensure our safety in these tumultuous times. Ariel's reaction to our visitors caught me off guard. While she immediately clicked with the bubbly and loud Scarlet, forming an instant friendship that filled the cabin with laughter, I noticed her discomfort around Vincent. Throughout the entire evening, she skillfully avoided his gaze, leaving me to wonder about the source of her unease. On the 6th day, as we lounged in the living room during the early afternoon, engrossed in a random sitcom playing on the plasma TV, the front door creaked open unexpectedly. Our attention collectively shifted to the entrance, where we were greeted by the sight of Xavier, his usual composure replaced by a weary demeanor, accompanied by a rigid Vincent. Their unusual postures and expressions immediately caught my eye, a stark contrast to their typical demeanor. Xavier's eyes were clouded with exhaustion, his usually impeccable hair slightly disheveled. Elliot and I rose to greet them, concern etched on our faces. As Xavier's gaze fell upon me, I noticed a subtle softening in his eyes, a momentary respite from the weight he seemed to be carrying. Morning, everyone. Seth grabbed the remote control and switched off the TV. Everyone in the room's attention fully diverted towards Xavier as he spoke. There have been some updates, and it's best that I inform you of what went down. We nodded expectantly, waiting for him to continue. Xavier strolled over to a single couch and plopped down on it, gesturing to Elliot and I to also return to our previous seats. We did as told. Last night, my men were able to trace down the intruders and things took a violent turn. He began to explain. Long story short, the third in command of our rival pack had been shot dead along with a number of his followers. My eyes widened, and simultaneously gasps echoed around the room. Wait, this section, I'd wake me wait. What? Elliot exclaimed, fuming. His eyes were narrowed dangerously. Don't you? To which Xavier's head fell to the floor and with a clenched jaw. He slowly nodded. I glanced between them nervously. What does that mean? I asked. Xavier rubbed his hands, hesitating to answer me. It means we need to set a bigger protection detail on you guys, until things come to a complete end. I heard someone scoff from the other side of the room. And when will that be? Exactly. Noah asked furiously. Soon. I breathed in sharply, my eyes taking every honest reaction. Ariel was in a shocked state, her mouth slightly open as she looked around the room, while Bella and Seth were fighting hard to maintain a calm expression. The closer we were coming to an end to this whole mafia, revenge was the more dangerous it was getting, and a deep feeling of dread was settling in my chest as I begged myself to continue clinging onto the bit of faith I had in Xavier keeping us all safe. I can't stress this enough, but it's important that you all remain within the estate's premises as it is guarded all around and we need to be able to keep an eye on you. For how long? I hissed. We don't even have any of our belongings. It's like we're living as prisoners here. I motioned around the room aimlessly. I will assign someone to bring you whatever you need from downtown, but you must stay here, Xavier insisted. I sighed deeply, slumping down into the couch in defeat. And we need to discuss strategies. I looked up at him in confusion, only to find that his comment was directed to Elliot instead. Elliot nodded his head once while staring at Xavier through narrowed eyes, clearly not approving of the sudden turn of events. I think we all need to discuss strategies. I jumped in. Xavier's intense gaze found mine, and he raised a brow in question. We need to be able to protect ourselves instead of completely relying on you men to do so. It's sexist and frankly beyond offending. I clenched my jaw. I watched as Xavier's eyes lighten up with amusement. Fair enough. I rolled my eyes at the nickname. But for now, I will need Elliot and No's help to strategize, as they are aware of each of your abilities. And then we will inform you of the final plan. How does that sound? He asked me. I frowned deeply, still not liking how he singled out Elliot and No instead of involving us all to help. But I forced myself to nod once interested to see how this will play out. If you would kindly follow me. Xavier nodded at Elliot and No before standing up from his seat. They followed him in his actions as he retreated towards the front door. He stopped to glance at us one last time, offering a tight, reassuring smile to me before shutting the door behind him. Ariel sighed loudly, slumping down in her seat. Her face was shoved into a pillow as she muffled incoherently, "We're all gonna die." It took me a few seconds to piece her mumbled words together. But when I did, I frowned and yanked her by the shirt upwards into a seating position. She gasped and sat upright, her eyes widening as they fell to where I clutched onto her shirt. "Don't say that," I hissed. She narrowed her eyes. "It's the truth." "No, it's not. Nothing's going to happen to us." My eyes darted to Bella and Seth who sat quietly watching us. Their worry-filled gazes were enough to assure me that they didn't believe the words I spoke, and their silence had me freaking out even further. "Would you guys please say something?" I begged. Bella inhaled sharply, as he hesitated as her eyes darted to the floor. I honestly don't know what to say, or expect. "It's going to be all right. Guys," Seth suddenly spoke in a strong, determined voice. I glanced over at him to see a deep frown set on his face. I nodded. "It will be," but I didn't know whether my words were meant to reassure them, or me. "They'll be heading up to my room," Ariel announced as she got up from her seat. I frowned as I studied her expression. She didn't offer another word as she continued up the staircase and towards her room, slamming the door shut. I sighed. "It'll start on Monday. Bells. A hand." Seth glanced at Bella and offered her a smile, obviously trying to calm her nerves down. She inhaled sharply and nodded. They started making their way towards the kitchen, Bella going over to one side and grabbing a large covered book off the counter and spreading it open, her eyes reading over its contents. I whittled with my thumbs, now left completely alone in the living room. A voice in the back of my mind shouted at me to go console Ariel, but I didn't know how to do so. She was clearly overwhelmed by everything that was going down, and no matter how hard I tried, I cowed and stopped the guilt-ridden feeling from crawling its way once again into my chest and hovering over my heart like a dark shadow, waiting for the right instance to occur so it could finally claw its way inside out. But I won't let anything go wrong. I can't let anything go wrong. I set my palms on the couch and shoved myself upright, standing up and marching determinedly up the stairs, heading towards Ariel's bedroom. My hand came up to pull the handle down but stopped as I heard her voice from inside. "Yeah, I just miss you," she spoke. I frowned as my hand fell down to my side, straining my ear to hear her properly. "We're having a good time. Everything's going great. I was just checking in since it's been a while." There was a moment of silence afterwards. "I hope to see you soon." Her voice wavered. I love you. Mom, always." I felt the weight in my chest get heavier, almost dragging me down to the floor. unable to contain it any longer. My hand came to the handle and I shoved the door open. Ariel let out a small jump, her reddened eyes widening as they met my own. She rubbed away at her tear-stained cheeks and cleared her throat, her phone lying down in front of her on the bed. "What are you doing here? Did something happen?" she asked. I walked inside and over to her bed, sitting down on the plush mattress with my gaze never leaving her avoidant one. She was looking at everything but me. "I wanted to speak with you." Ariel puckered her lips. "Why?" I sighed, looking down at her hands where she fiddled with her thumbs. "How was your mom?" She finally glanced into my eyes, frowning, when realization hit her that I heard her at the door. She rolled her eyes. "She's fine. Glad I'm having the time of my life." I clenched my jaw. "Ariel, I promise you everything's going to be all right." She suddenly snapped. "Oh yeah, and how are you so sure about that?" "Because your boyfriend promised you so." Well, he promised us all, and we nearly got killed more times than I can count." I let her release her pent-up anger. "The least I could do is say goodbye to my mother before it was too late. And you're giving me crap for that too." I shook my head, opening my mouth to tell her I wasn't, but she never allowed me to speak. "I advise you to do the same. He killed their third in command. For God's sake. That's no joke. You're smart enough to realize how these men work and how serious it is to kill someone within a high rank. And don't you dare give me all this nonsense about how it's going to be all right. You're not fooling anyone. It's only going downhill from here on out." I bit the inside of my cheek, staring into her intense gaze and watching the fire burn behind her eyes. Ariel was shaking, gripping tightly onto the bed sheet with tightened fists. I knew she spoke only the truth, which is why I couldn't say anything back. Suddenly, there was a loud crashing sound followed by a thud. Ariel and I both flinched as our eyes darted towards the open door. A shrilling scream sounded for a nanosecond before it turned into a muffled noise, and my heart instantly fell to my stomach. I jumped off my seat, Ariel's movements following my own. Her widened eyes found mine as I darted towards the door. "What was that?" she whispered. "Stay here," I demanded. She shook her head frantically. "No, I'm coming with you." "Stay here?" "Ariel," I hissed. "Don't leave me here. Lock the door and call Elliot. But stay in this room," I insisted. Her eyes were glazing over with tears, her quivering hands finding my own and clutching onto them tightly. "Please, Ariel, do as I say." She shook her head, her tears now streaming down her reddened cheeks. I roughly pushed her inside the bedroom by the shoulders, grabbing the handle and shutting the door as I stepped out. I strained to hear any noise from downstairs, but the only sound in my ears was drumming of my heart beats. With light steps I walked over to the top of the staircase, trying to glance downstairs but unable to see anything from that angle. My ears suddenly detected a light groan of pain, which fueled my legs to move forwards, and I jogged down the stairs. I ran towards the kitchen to where I last saw Seth and Bella, praying to all the powers in the universe for them to be okay. I was about to burst through the kitchen door but fell a step behind as I was suddenly yanked by the shirt, almost losing my balance and falling backwards, but instead coming up against a hard chest. An arm snaked around my shoulder and a tight grip found my neck. I gasped loudly, but it was interrupted by the rough squeeze that clenched all around my throat and restricted the air from passing through my windpipe. My eyes widened, going into full panic mode, and I was preparing myself to elbow my captor when the grip was suddenly loosened and I let myself gasp for air. I was pushed roughly into the kitchen, with my captor's hold still around my throat. As I was shoved through the kitchen door, the first thing my eyes fell upon was the immobile figure lying face first on the wooden floors, with crimson, red splotches covering the back of its head. My mouth opened to let out a shrilling scream, but the only noise that came out was a strangled sob. My widened eyes searched around the room, and as the shock hit me, I stumbled a step back only for my action to be blocked by my captor's chest. For pairs of eyes were staring back at me, only one of them recognizable, and terror-filled. I gasped. "Let go of her," I roared as I shot forward. The grip tightened around my throat and pulled me back, slamming me hard into the chest of my captor, who leaned forward and teased in my ear. My own eyes began to water as I fought for air, scratching against the hand encircling my throat. "Will you behave?" His breath in my ears. I nodded frantically, my vision blurring, until he eventually loosened his grip and I inhaled deeply. "Kate, please. Let her go." My eyes found Bella's glassy ones as she cried within the hold of a stranger, his hands tightly clasped around her mouth to keep her from making any noise. My eyes made contact with her captor's for a second, begging him to release her from his grip. But the bastard had the nerve to only smirk back. "She has nothing to do with this," I yelled. "Enough with the nagging," one of the other men groaned. He was sitting on the countertop, his gloved hands wiping away at the hand of his gun. When I noticed the white cloth and its red stains cleaning away at the back of his gun, a bile rose in my throat. My eyes fell down to where Seth lay immobile, and I let out an uncontrolled sob. "And no," I whispered, taking in his state as he lay motionless, frozen. I let out another sob, inching closer towards Seth, but I was once again pulled back by my captor. Why was he moving? Chapter 30. An agonizing sense of frustration settled deep in my chest as I tried to continuously push away from the grip of my captor to check on Seth, as he lay with an oozing wound on the back of his head. But my attempts were futile. The fight was only tiring me down as my culprit's grip on my neck tightened, restricting the amount of oxygen that traveled through my windpipe. The salty tears that had run down my cheeks were leaving an itchy trail behind, but I cowed and wiped them away as my hands were clawing and scratching at the grip around my throat. For a moment, I was about to drop my arms to my sides and give up the fight I had put on, as it had seemed pointless and I was growing very, very tired. But a momentary glance at Bella suddenly washed away that sense as fast as it had come. Her terror-filled gaze stared back at me helplessly as her burly captor fixed his hand on her mouth so tightly, deeming it impossible for her to speak, with his robust arms wrapped around her feeble arms and waist securing her completely in his grip. He looked like he was suffocating her, and it enraged me. Not only had they knocked my friend unconscious with a possibly life-threatening head trauma, but they were close to hurting another innocent. And I was going to have that. Not when I knew it was me they were after. With newfound strength, I suddenly jerked my right arm forward and with a strong force shoved it backwards to elbow my captor in his liver, earning a loud groan. I reached for his arm and within his weakened state, grabbed it and twisted it so his grip was entirely off my neck. And I turned with his arm in my hold and raised my knee, hitting him in the groin. As he hunched forward, I quickly turned around and delivered a blow with my elbow to his nose, hearing a slight crack as he fell backwards to the floor. As I set my foot forward towards the man holding Bella, she let out a muffled scream in warning, and within the same moment a burly arm encircled my waist and pulled me back. I scratched at the arms of my second captor, drawing blood to the surface, when I suddenly heard the slight creak of the old kitchen door. The instant I shifted to look over my shoulder, I heard a loud crashing sound and the man behind me groaned in pain, his hold on me loosening and allowing me the opportunity to scurry away. I turned and gasped at the scenery where Ariel stood trembling, a crashed vase on the floor beside my unconscious captor's bleeding head. "Ariel," I exclaimed, about to yell for her to run, but the words got stuck in my throat as the first man who had recovered from the blows I sent his way, and reached out for Ariel, pulling her violently by the hair and retracting a silver knife from his back pocket. I gasped, my hands immediately coming up to surrender. No, please, let her go. But Ariel, in her freak state, screamed and thrashed in his hold, unaware of the weapon in his grip. She scratched at his face and in return, he slashed deeply into her arm. My scream echoed that of Ariel's as a deep gash in her arm was slit open, and within seconds crimson blood began to trickle and flow down the length of her arm and drip onto the wooden floors. An uncontrolled sob escaped my throat, my body beginning to tremble as I started to hyperventilate. "That's enough," one man yelled, entering my line of vision. He lifted up his gun with one hand, shifting it in the air to shine light on it. I won't hesitate to empty my bullets in the bodies of your friends to end this once and for all. I began to shake my head uncontrollably. Now, do you want us to go on with this the easy way, or the hard way? He sneered. I let out a choked sob. "Yes, stop," I whispered. "I'll go with you. I'll leave willingly, just let them go." Ariel was trying desperately to fight back with her single and harmed arm, her other limp at her side as it dripped blood onto the floor. "Good choice," I heard the man mumble, slowly nodding towards his followers. Simultaneously, the man holding Ariel and the one holding Bella both released their grips, and I watched as the girls both scurried away from them. Bella fell to the floor beside Seth as she gasped for air, releasing a loud, choked sob. Her trembling hands hovered over his body, desperate to check his injuries but afraid of causing further damage. "Is he okay?" I whispered. Bella's head snapped to mine, her teary eyes wide and alert. Her bottom lip was quivering as she held back her sobs. Our grip enclosed around my arm and jerked me away from where I stood. I gasped from the sudden movement, nearly losing my balance. I stumbled over to the back door located in the kitchen, which I had just begun to notice was wide open. My eyes remained on Bella as I was violently yanked towards the escape. "Bella, is he okay? Is he alive?" I yelled. I had to know if he was at least alive. Bella's only response was a loud sob, shaking her head wildly as her eyes traveled over Seth's motionless form, inspecting it in a manic state. I don't. She stammered in between sobs as I reached the door. My heart was beating loudly in my chest, and my eyes traveled to Ariel as I saw her slumping to the floor. Her eyes half closed as she clutched onto her wounded arm with her shirt and jeans soaked in the blood's crimson shade. I was shoved so violently out the door that I lost my balance and fell on my knees, my hands falling flat to the grass. "Get up, bitch." Someone suddenly yanked me by the hair. I let out a yelp as I jumped to my feet, but the grip still didn't let loose. He jerked my head to the side as his lips neared my ear. "Thought you really did something back there getting me at a moment of weakness, huh? You'll pay for what you did. I can promise you that." I was given the chance to return the promise as someone whistled from far away. "Hurry the fuck up," he yelled to the one holding me. I was pushed forwards violently, and I stumbled over my own feet, but regained my balance, not wanting to fall down once more. The man holding the gun, the one I suspected was behind Seth's injury, was leading the way, while beside me stood the man who grabbed me the first time and whose nose I broke. I resisted the urge to smirk proudly at the thought, and behind us followed the one that had held Bella. It was then that I realized they left the fourth man that Ariel sneaked up on unconscious in the kitchen back at the cabin. I instantly felt a flutter of hope in my heart as I prayed for Xavier to interrogate the man if he was still alive and find out where I'm being taken to. We were being led through the vast forest behind Xavier's cabin, stepping over broken twigs that had fallen from the mighty trees. Their movements were rushed, and it thrilled me to know it was due to their fear of being caught, which meant there was hope for my rescue. My insides were churning with fear as I wondered what might happen to me within the next minute, because anything could. At any moment, they could be taking me to the middle of the woods to shoot me dead, or they could be planning on holding me captive as they bargained deals with Xavier, forcing him to agree to their tradings. Or maybe they planned on slowly torturing me to get back at Xavier for killing one of their own. There were endless possibilities, and as my mind kept drifting further away, I found my insides as something to my right momentarily caught my attention for standing out among the natural scenery. Among the greenness and light brownness of the forest floor stood out a figure in all black. My eyes trailed over the body of the unconscious man who lay face flat against the dirt, and my gaze lingered on his soaked shirt. Against the darkness of his torn black attire, it was difficult to distinguish the stain, but it didn't take a genius to figure out it was his own blood. There were stab wounds all around his abdomen and back that tore through his shirt. I felt a bile rising in my throat, and within seconds, I found myself hunched over, grabbing my knees as I emptied the contents of my stomach onto the forest ground. That was way too much blood for one day. I was given the time to compose myself afterwards as I was roughly yanked upwards and pushed forward, the man behind me hissing at me to keep going. I forced my feet to keep moving, trying to push the image of the dead man whom it assumed was one of Xavier's guards to the back of my head. However, the attempt was proven futile as we stumbled upon yet another body that was curled on the ground, unmoving, in a black attire stained with his own blood, another dead guard. My heart was clenched painfully tight in my chest and I was on the verge of a breakdown, but I fought hard to control and contain my emotions, knowing damn well they won't hesitate to slash my throat if I delayed them a second longer. I lowered my gaze to the ground as I continued moving, unable to look forward as I knew for sure my eyes would lie upon several other soulless corpses whom these men had murdered in broad daylight. After a rushed 5-minute walk, we had reached a clearing where two large SUVs were parked, the two men standing outside keeping guard. My heart's rate sped up in my chest, nearly bursting through my rib cage as I began to panic. 5 heavily armed and skilled murderers were taking me away, and no one was leaping out to rescue me. I turned around to glance at the way we came, hoping and praying that there'd be a single guard who'd survived, jumping from behind a tree and shooting the perpetrators down and saving me. But the only sight that greeted me back was the silence of the still trees. As I turned around to face the men, I saw their superior who'd had his gun inspecting me with a tilted head, a smirk rising to his face. "Sorry to disappoint, Princess, but seems like no one's coming to your rescue." I forced the fear to the back of my mind, clenching my fists tightly at my sides as I narrowed my eyes at him. I opened my mouth to respond to his remark, but saw him lift his chin and motioning to someone behind me. The next thing I knew, there was a sharp pain traveling down the back of my head as something was rammed into it hard, blurring my vision. I stumbled forward, losing my balance and falling to the dirt. Through hazy vision, I saw pairs of dark boots nearing me, accompanied by a feeling of chilling darkness that engulfed my senses, and I gradually lost the last bit of my consciousness. Chapter 31. Nora. A familiar voice was calling out to me. I turned as I searched among the dark abyss for the source, but came up empty. It called out to me again in a panic-stricken tone, yelling from a distance so great I had to strain my ears and hold my breath to hear it clearly, calling out and begging me to declare my whereabouts. My heart ached and throbbed. I wanted him to find me, but every time I opened my mouth to respond, it only let out a breath of cold air. I felt a strong jerk pull me awake from my sleep, and my first thought was that it was freezing cold, wherever I was, and I knew so because my entire body was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth clattering as my jaw trembled. My neck had cramped up, and I let out a pained groan as I tried to move it from its dangled position. I forcefully craned my neck to glance at my surroundings, and for a few seconds my mind swirled with confusion. Either my eyes were still shut or I had gone blind, because the only thing that greeted me back was pure darkness that made it impossible to even identify the shapes of the objects in the room, had there been any. I gulped nervously, fighting hard to maintain my composure. I could remember everything that went down all the way to the part where I was assaulted and lost consciousness, and I knew that the only way to make it out of here, wherever here was alive, was by staying composed and controlling my thoughts and emotions. Freaking out would take you nowhere, I reminded myself. I inhaled deeply, feeling my body shake as the cold air traveled through my lungs. I focused my attention on the sense of touch. My hands were tied behind my back. I could feel the roughness of the tightened ropes around my wrist cutting into my skin. My ankles were free though, and my feet were flat against the ground. I must be seated on a metal chair, I thought to myself, as I moved my hands and felt the coldness of the metal on my skin. I forced my neck to the side, stretching my stiffened muscles, and I felt the soft texture of a cloth on my face. I was blindfolded. That's why I couldn't see anything. Suddenly, the crunching of footsteps sounded from afar, but it was nearing my spot. I felt my heart begin to race and pound against my rib cage, and I gulped the nerves away. I listened in carefully, not moving a single muscle in my body, and I was able to identify two different patterns of steps, meaning there were at least two people nearing me. My fear fueled the adrenaline rush in my veins, and I found my fingers clawing at the rope around my wrists. I scratched at it, forced my wrists wide open, shifted my hands into different positions, and eventually caught the end of the rope. I began to untie myself, which seemed like an impossible task, and the thought of never getting out of wherever I was spread a deep sense of dread through my chest, and I felt it begin to constrict as my fear invaded my vision. Breathe. My fingers picked at the end of the rope. In the process, it dug deeper into my wrist and I felt the ends penetrating my skin. I winced but continued dripping at it. There came a sound of jingling of keys, and I held my breath as my movements came to a halt. Seconds later, an obnoxious creak sounded as a door was moved. Even though I was still blind to what was ahead of me, I could still sense the moment they stepped into the same room I was in. Their aura was there, invading my personal space and shoving a deep sense of terror into my chest. I felt my blood run cold as my fear took control, this time shutting my body down that I found no more courage to fight, but instead I sat completely still as I anticipated the next move. I heard the footsteps near me, and I flinched visibly when a rough hand clasped the back of my head, and fingers undid my blindfold. It fell down onto my lap, and I blinked away the pain of being exposed to brightness after adjusting to the dark. I felt the cold air cool the part of my skin that was covered behind the cloth for so long. A pair of long legs stood opposite me, spread open in a dominant stance. I moved my eyes over the figure until they reached a pair of eyes I never imagined staring into ever again. My heart skipped a beat. The loud gasp that escaped my lips startled the both of us, and I could see the recognition flash through his eyes. Well, no, this is not happening. A voice screamed in my head. It can't be real. He can't be here. It's been a while. Nora, I'm asleep. I wanted to wake up. Aren't you glad to see me again? I heard you spent quite an effort looking for me after I left. I watched his lips curl into a patronizing smile. My chest was on fire. I suddenly realized that it stopped breathing. I inhaled sharply, but I hated that it came out as a gasp. He chuckled. It's all right, baby. I'm back now. He mocked, and I felt my blood boil, this time with rage. Fuck you. I saw the surprise flash behind his eyes. He clearly didn't expect me to be so blunt. There came an awkward cough from behind me, and we were suddenly reminded that we weren't alone in the room. I watched as the surprise transformed into rage behind his ice-cold eyes, and his eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. I hadn't had the chance to blink twice before the sound of a deep slap resonated in the cellar. It took me a few seconds too long to finally process that I was on the receiving end. My cheek began to heat up instantly from the blow, and I clenched my jaw as the rage brewed in my veins. I thought you might have learned your lesson the last time you chose to disrespect me. He hissed furiously. I bit my tongue to hold back from replying, knowing I had to play this smart. His eyes gazed into my own, waiting for a reaction, and when he realized he won't be receiving none, he let out a dark chuckle and moved back a step. His gaze moved to the man standing behind me. Well, deal with her later. Let's go. Yes, sir. I thought to myself, and I couldn't resist the urge to scoff, which didn't go unnoticed by the jerk in front of me. As soon as he began to turn around to leave, he stopped in his tracks. He faced me again and raised an eyebrow in question. Something you'd like to add? I bit my tongue, almost drawing blood, and continued to glare at him. When a few seconds passed and he didn't receive a response from me, he finally let out a deep chuckle. You'll see you again. Try not to miss me too much. He added a wink before turning to leave, the man who stood behind me following after him. They closed the door behind them, not forgetting to lock it as well. I took in a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, now that I knew what I was against. I'd had to fight smart in order to get out unharmed. Or rather, less harmed than in my current situation. I could still feel the heaviness of the bastard's palm throbbing against my cheek. I was sure it were to leave a mark. Suddenly remembering where it last left off, I began to blindly search for the end of the rope wrapped around my wrist. It was looser than it was when I'd first woken up, and the thought gave me a sudden rush of hope that inspired me to keep up my work, as I continuously affirmed in my mind that incapable of helping myself out of this situation. I cowled and kept waiting and hoping for Xavier or his men to come find me. I was tired of waiting for others to rescue me. My wrists felt like they were on fire. The roughness of the rope kept rubbing against my skin at a flame, but I cowled and stopped. I don't know when the men would be back, or what they even had in mind for me. I have to make sure at least be able to protect myself if they decide to harm me. I closed my eyes as I focused on the soul sense of touch, imagining where the end of the rope lay and how to twist it out and around the hold it had on me. After what felt like 5 minutes of blindly playing around the rope, I could feel the grip on my wrists loosening significantly, until I was finally able to set myself free. I sighed in relief as I pulled my arms forward, cringing at the pain of my sore muscles, and rubbed at the redness around my wrist. They were bleeding in some areas as the result of the rope poking my skin, but it was nothing too significant. I took the time to study my surrounding, turning in my chair to check what was behind me as I was positioned in the middle of the small cellar, and I found there to be a single wooden table with nothing on top. My heart suddenly fell to my stomach as I spotted several dried maroon stains on the floor and undoubtedly blood. Is here where they torture their victims? I cowled and helped but think, and my stomach churned at the thought. The rest of the room appeared to be empty, and so next I searched the corners of the ceiling, and to my relief found no cameras. If someone was watching me untie myself, things would have gotten a lot more complicated. After what felt like nearly half an hour of sitting on the metal chair, I considered getting up to stretch my muscles a bit. But as soon as the thought appeared to me, the sound of upcoming footsteps returned from behind the door. My head snapped to the rope lying on my lap, and I immediately grabbed it and wrapped it around one of my wrists tightly, then moved my arms behind my back where it looked like I still had my wrist. The door was unlocked, and this time, only one pair of legs stormed in before closing the door. I narrowed my eyes as I stared back into the eyes of the blue-eyed bastard. He cracked a smirk as he took a couple of steps forward to near me. I thought we could use some privacy. It's been a while. I clenched my fists tightly, telling myself to buy a little more time. What are you doing here? I seethed. I thought maybe we could catch up. He smirked at me, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Are you a part of this gang? I felt a sudden rush of bravery as I asked the question, knowing no doubt it would get me in trouble. However, I was surprised to find his reaction to contradict my expectation. Instead of fuming up, he ended up laughing. Gang. He shook his head in disbelief. No, baby. This is no gang. This is family. He suddenly got serious at the mention of the word family. A family, which your new boy toy felt he could so freely mess with. I felt my eyebrows furrowing in confusion, before things slowly clicked in place. He must have meant Xavier, though the witch, though. I gotta admit. He smiled half crookedly as his hands went into the pockets of his black jeans. I was kinda surprised to find that this new lover of his turned out to be no other than you. He chuckled while shaking his head. You just can't seem to keep yourself out of trouble. Can you? Always going for the bad guys. Xavier isn't a bad guy. I mumbled, feeling the need to defend his name. His face turned serious as he clenched his jaw tightly. Don't be defending a man you know nothing about. I do know Xavier. I insisted. I saw fire raging behind the cold blue. Your boy killed my cousin. And I can promise you, baby, that kind of action does not go unpaid by my family. I could hear the threat lace behind his voice. He took slow steps forward, his eyes never leaving mine, but his hands slowly coming out of his pockets. I had no doubt he meant that I would be the one to pay for Xavier's action. My fists clenched around the rope, bracing myself to attack at just the right moment. His steps continued to come closer, and suddenly, he was standing a mere foot away from me. I held my breath as he leaned his upper body forward until his face were mere inches apart from mine. Shall we finish where we last left off? He whispered, and that did it. With newfound strength, my arms broke free from behind my back and I sent a strong punch to his nose. feeling the bone slam against my knuckles and the slight crack sounding in the silence of the room. I pushed my chair back, hearing its creak on the floor, and I jumped a good 3 feet back as I took a defending stance, my left leg in front of my right and my clenched fists up in the air. The blue-eyed bastard had a hand clutched to his nose as it ran some blood down his chin. The scene on sight was one I was sure etched to my brain for the rest of my life. What a sight to see. I resisted the urge to smirk as his eyes flared and snapped to mine, the crazy taking over the wheel. I braced myself as he launched forward, his bloodied hands out to grab me, but I ducked and sent a left hook to his liver, and heard him let out a loud groan, stepping backward while clutching his side in pain. Suddenly, he let out a scream that was sure to grab the attention of whoever else was in this household. My eyes widened, realizing I would have to run for it before more men come through the door, because then I would surely be dead. Before I had a chance to react, the door was shoved open and the man from earlier stared between us with widened eyes. He stormed towards me, but as I turned to slide away, a fist came slamming into my left cheekbone, and my vision blackened for a few seconds. Within my weakened state, rough arms grabbed a hold of my own and yanked them behind my back. I felt another blow come to my jaw, undoubtedly ripping open a cut on my bottom lip as I could taste the blood. Your face was always my favorite part, he seethed as he raised his fist for a third blow. This time, I managed to duck, and due to our close proximity and his menaced state, he managed to instead punch the man behind me. I heard a deep groan, and took the opportunity of his loosened grip on me to kick him in the legs, then elbow him in the face, making him lose his balance and fall to the floor. I looked at the man sprawled out on the floor, his hands covering his bloodied face as he continued to writhe in pain. He was in a black suit, and his suit jacket was sprawled open around his waist. My eyes fell on the shining object calling out to me from inside his jacket, and without another second to rethink my decision, I reached forward and yanked the handgun out of its holder. I lifted the heavy object upwards, instantly pointing it at the blue-eyed bastard. He flinched back and froze as he stood on the other end of the pistol. I shut my brain down, refusing to listen to my thoughts that demanded I think this through properly before taking action. I was furious. My chest was heaving up and down, and my face was aflame. The bruises and the cuts, the injuries I carried, they were all fueling my anger. I pulled the slide on top of the handgun bag. Nora, he spoke. I hated when he said my name. Don't do this. Hold on. Now you shouldn't have run. Darius. His eyes widened, panic clearly swarming behind his gaze. I had no other choice. No other choice. I boomed, my anger almost completely invading my vision. You don't get to have a choice. I made a mistake. Nora. He took a step forward with his hands raised in the air, and I fixed the aim of the gun on him. Stay there, I warned. Please, baby. He spoke softly, and I felt a bile rising in my throat. Don't fucking call me that. I saw the quick flicker of his eyes moving to the ground behind me, then instantly returning back to my face. Suddenly, I remembered that we weren't alone in the room. When I quickly glanced over my shoulder to the man who was lying on the ground, I found him in a crouching position as he prepared to get up, his eyes set on me. A sudden wave of bravery washed over me, and I snapped my head forward. I stared into the cold, blue eyes, the ones I had once grown to love, and I decided that I don't want anyone to ever see the monster behind them. And so, I pulled the trigger. Chapter 32. I shot him. I shot another human being. He might not be innocent and it might have been for self-defense, but I shot someone. The force of the bullet blasting out of the pistol had me stagger a step backward, and my grip loosened on the handgun so it fell to the floor with a loud clank. My trembling hands fell down to my sides and I watched, wide-eyed, as Darius crumbled to the floor, tightly clutching onto his left side. Blood was seeping through his fingers, and his contorted face was turning a shade redder as he tried to contain his pain and not let it show. His eyes shot up to mine, only instead of flashing me his signature hard glare, This time it was softer, almost pleading. Suddenly, I felt the air getting knocked out of my lungs as I was lunged at. Heavy arms wrapped around my waist and hauled me to the ground, and I let out a pained groan as I crashed to the floor. The other man's hands tightly gripped onto my wrists and pinned them to my sides, but I struggled and lifted him off me by pushing my hips upwards, creating enough distance to knee him in the stomach. His grip loosened a bit, and I took the chance to twist my wrist free of his hold. I scrambled up to my feet. I lifted it up as I stood and pointed it at the man crouched on the floor, his jade eyes widened like a deer's caught in the headlights of an oncoming bus, and he raised his hands and his eyes begging me for a second chance. I don't know him, I thought to myself, so I cowled and shoot him. My feet started working backwards, retreating me towards the door as my hands stayed threateningly aimed at the man. When I stepped through the door frame, everything started moving in fast motion. 1 second I was facing the small cellar I was locked in. The next I was sprinting up the wooden stairs leading to the house. When I reached the top, I studied my surrounding and found that we were in a cabin. I sprinted down a hallway and around leather couches stationed across a lit fireplace, and found the front door, which was spread wide open with 2 burly men guarding its front. They must have heard the squeaking of my shoes because the second I paused in front of them, they stopped their conversation and their heads snapped to my direction. Their hands instantly traveled to the waistband of their pants, where I was sure they were to retrieve their guns. So I did the unthinkable. I raised the pistol in my hands and began shooting in the air. I only saw the blur of their bodies falling to the floor as they tried to dodge the bullets blasting through my handgun, and I retreated towards the open kitchen space where I located a back door. When there were no more bullets left in the gun, I tossed it away on the kitchen counter and yanked the door open and ran out the cabin without sparing a glance behind. I was in an open field of brown, dying grass, and 10 feet ahead of me rose hundreds of enormous trees. I followed the path into the woods, figuring that the only chance I had at losing the men on my heels was by zigzagging my way among the tall trees. As I jogged over fallen logs and ducked beneath poking twigs, the only sounds resonating throughout the woods were my heavy breathing and the faint scrunching of footsteps over fallen leaves. I knew that at least 5 men were targeting me, stealthily following behind me but not speaking among themselves as to not inform me of their whereabouts. I had to fight hard to keep my mind blank, pushing away the image of the wounded body whom I'd shot earlier from my mind. You had to protect yourself, I kept reminding myself. You know how bad he is. You cowled and have let your guard down in front of him. Not for a second, or else history would have repeated itself. As the thoughts turned my mind into a jumbled mess, I ended up stumbling over a log and falling to my knees on the ground, scraping my hands as they fell flat to the dirt by the bits of rocks and smaller twigs. I rubbed my palms on my dirty jeans, scrambling up to my feet, sneaking a quick glance over my shoulder. I heard the crunching of leaves getting louder as the perpetrators neared me. My heart began thrumming in my ears and I turned to continue my way straight ahead. But a sudden flash of black knocked me backwards and I fell to the ground. I let out a loud yelp as the back of my head collided with a sharp rock and it grazed into my skin. My eyes opened to search for what had startled me, and I found a pair of long legs standing directly above my torso. Leather boots stationed on the right and left side of my waist. The man was looking down on me, eyes as narrowed and sneering. I hadn't seen him before. He had bushy beard and a bald head, and from my angle he looked twice as burly and intimidating. I swallowed the lump growing in my throat, blinking the blur in my vision away, before I had a chance to fully comprehend what was happening. He leaned down and with one hand fisted my shirt and yanked me upwards into a seating position. I thrashed around as my shirt felt like it was about to be torn, but when he wouldn't budge and instead tighten his grip, I gave in and reluctantly stood up to my full height, the back of my head aching from the impact of the fall. His fist loosened on my shirt but instead traveled to my hair, which he yanked rather roughly as he turned me around to face the direction it'd come from. I winced and my hands moved to his, scratching and clawing at it. "Let me go," I yelled. But he ignored my cries and shoved me forward. his grip tightening to the point where I felt the slightest flick of his wrist would pull the hair off my scalp. I raised my foot and brought it down on his own so roughly. I nearly lost my balance. I heard him let out a breath of air, but he quickly recovered from the pain. His grip loosened on my hair, and instead moved to my shoulders, which he gripped tightly and shoved my back roughly into a nearby tree. He was fuming, his face redder than I remembered from earlier. I only saw the flash of his arm flinging backwards, then suddenly the air was knocked out of my lungs. I hunched forward, letting out a pain cry as I felt the heavy impact of his fist connecting with my stomach. "Keep moving, bitch," he hissed lowly, his hand moving back to my hair and forcing me to stand upright and continue moving. I could barely hold my balance as I was in too much pain and very fatigued, and I kept stumbling every step of the way, which only angered my captor further, and he tightened his grip on my hair with every move. I winced loudly when his hold became too unbearable, my hand coming up to scratch at his own. "Let go of me. I'm walking. Aren't I?" I shouted angrily. When I didn't receive a reply, I shifted awkwardly around in his grip to take a glance at his face, while his hand was still fisted by my scalp. The dark void of his eyes stared back at me plainly. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Then suddenly, a flash of white over his broad shoulders caught my attention, and I darted my eyes towards the source. They widened as I discovered that it was not just one flash of white, but instead a pack of 4-legged animals sprinting among the trees. My mouth opened and I let out a loud gasp as they slowed their movement. Now I could clearly see that we were surrounded from every side by what appeared to be wolves. Their canines elongated and they snarled at us, their wide, narrow eyes stationed on us as they slowly, creepily, began to near us. The man noticed my reaction and loosened his grip on my head, turning around to sneak a glance at what had triggered my fear. His hands fell down to his sides as he searched around us, turning in a full circle, and seeing that we were surrounded all around by what looked like at least a dozen wolves. Where the hell did they come from? My heart began to thrum loudly, and I screamed in my head to calm down. They can sense fear. "Oh, we are so dead." My captors are moved to the waistband of his jeans as he retreated a gun. I gasped and took a step backward, only to watch him instead point it at the wolves. Simultaneously, the wolves began to growl furiously as if they understood what was about to happen. My palm fell flat to my chest as I breathed heavily, feeling myself on the verge of a heart attack. Suddenly, the loud bang of a shot being fired sounded in the silence of the forest, frightening the birds so they flew off the branches of the hundreds of trees, startling the wolves so they growled and jumped a step back, and taking me by surprise that I ended up letting out a scream. I stared wide-eyed at the man in front of me, only to realize he was not the one who had fired the shot, for he had ducked and turned in the direction where the sound came from, as if he too wanted to know who had pulled the trigger. I turned with him and found that 20 feet away from our left stood a group of 3 men dressed in black attires, and had their guns pointed our way. Only they were lower than our eye level, meaning they were aimed at the animals instead. I felt my heart clench in pain imagining the suffering it could cause the animals had they gotten shot. Loud and frightening growls suddenly emitted from the wolves as they sprang towards me, and I let out a scream as my arms came covering my head to protect myself from the attack. But when nothing happened, I slowly peeked through my arms to discover that they had circled me and were instead running in the direction of the 3 armed men. I yelped and fell to the ground on my stomach as the shots began to fire, my arms covering my head again as I lay flat against the dirt. My senses were evaded by the sounds of growls and the shots and the screams and the yelps. I felt my chest clenching as I forced myself to take a risky decision I knew for sure I could regret. My arms moved from around my head to the ground, and I pushed myself upwards, sprinting away from the scene of the fight. I ran and ran, jumping over fallen logs and stomping into mud puddles that splashed my entire jeans with dirt. And my heartbeat thumped and thumped until all I could hear was my heavy breathing, and all I could feel was the rapid beating. "Nora," I gasped, my ears straining to hear my voice being called again. I turned around as my feet came to an abrupt halt, and I peered among the tall trees to find Xavier standing 20 feet away from me, his eyes wide in fright as he stared at me like he had seen a ghost for the first time in his life. And glancing over his shoulders, I saw an army of nearly 20 men standing tall in an agitated stance, looking on edge as if ready to pounce at any second. My eyes suddenly welled up in tears and I sobbed uncontrollably, my feet moving on their own accord, and I found myself sprinting towards them. Then, at once, bullets were firing from my left. I let out a scream as I fell to the ground, hearing Xavier yell out my name in agony. My right thigh felt like it was on fire. I peered down through tear-filled eyes to see a blotch of crimson blood expanding across my jeans. They shot me. I could hear my loud heartbeat strumming in my ears. I could also hear a roar of fury and the thumping of dozens of paws. The wolves came surrounding us again, and as if my heart wasn't already beating at a rapid pace, it increased even further with my fear. I looked over at Xavier pleadingly, silently begging him to protect me from the long canines of the petrifying wolves. But Xavier was staring past me and the wolves, eyes narrowed and chest heaving up and down as he sized down his rival army, whom stood in a stiff stance with their guns pointed directly at us. How was he not seeing the bigger threat? The wolves could tear us apart much faster than those men could, even if they were armed. I opened my mouth to call out to Xavier, but my voice was stuck in my throat as I felt the last bit of my energy fading away. He suddenly let out a loud growl, one that raised the hair on the back of my neck and sent a cold shiver down my spine, and his gaze shifted to the wolves. With a fierce resolve and a raging expression, he growled out his order to his men, while staring directly in the eyes of the wolves. "Kill them all." I heard growls, a dozen furious ones, and as if they understood his command, the wolves all simultaneously shifted to face the rival gang and attacked. My neck began to heat up, and my head started to feel lighter than ever before. I stared through a hazed vision as Xavier and his men suddenly shot forward, but they only made it a couple feet closer to me before the black spots evaded my vision, and their roars began to fade away. Within seconds, I had completely lost my senses, and I felt myself falling through the void. Chapter 33. The first thing that came to my senses as I began to awaken was the fact that there was an irritably loud sniffling going on somewhere to my right. I strained my ears to hear properly, and immediately the sniffling was taken over by a loud gasp. Someone clutched my hand tightly and squeezed, and I frowned in discomfort. "Give her some damn space," a voice hissed. "Shut up." Shess waking up. I frowned as I tried to force my eyelids open, but they felt too heavy, almost as if they were sewn shut. I was suddenly blinded by bright white light, and it took a couple seconds of blinking repeatedly for my vision to adjust. There were 3 heads hovering directly over my body, their wide eyes staring at me expectantly. My brain was slowly working their features, trying to put them together to recognize who the faces belonged to. "Oh my God. Shess awake. You're awake." I groaned at their loud, high-pitched voices, closing my eyes. "Quiet down, would you?" Another voice scalded. "Noah, go get the doctor." I heard scuffling as Noah walked away and left through the door. I blinked the haziness in my vision away, and finally came to the realization that Bella and Ariel were the ones standing on either side of my bed. I glanced down at my body, which was covered by a thin, white sheet. "Hey," Bella whispered. "How are you feeling?" My throat felt like sandpaper. "Oh, okay," I croaked out, my voice raspy. "Would you like some water?" Ariel asked, and before I could answer, she was already pouring some into a glass from the bedside table. She offered it to me, then hesitated as she noticed that I was lying flat. I set my arms on the bed and tried to scoot upwards, but a sharp pain shot down my leg. I winced, instantly stopping my movement. "Careful." Bella leaned forward, gripping my arm to help me up. She fixed the pillows behind my back so I could sit upright with my legs outstretched. "Thanks," I mumbled as I reached for the water. I gulped half the cup down instantly, feeling ease the soreness of my throat. When I handed it back to Ariel, I noticed her arm was bandaged. Instantly, the memories of the last time I had been awake came to the front of my mind. I saw the events flash in front of me like a tsunami. My heart clenched painfully. "Are you okay?" I asked her worriedly, my eyes instantly welling up. She frowned, confusion swarming behind her ocean blue eyes. "Your arm." I looked down at her as she subconsciously wrapped her hand around the bandage. "Yeah, I'm all right. Don't worry about me." She gave me a reassuring smile. "How's Seth? Where is he?" The tears were now rolling down my cheeks and I had no control over my emotions. The image of him lying motionless on the floor pushed to the front of my mind, and a huge lump formed in my throat. I had to restrain the sobs fighting to escape my lips. "Seth is all right. He actually woke up before you, but HES in his own room, resting as the doctor had instructed." Bella informed me. "I want to see him." I wouldn't believe it before I saw it for myself. Bella shook her head. "Not right now. Nora, you just woke up after being out for so long. Rest a little." I frowned. Out for so long? How long had I been out for? And if that's the case, then I've rested enough anyway. "I don't feel tired anymore." I rushed an explanation. Ariel rolled her eyes at my stubbornness. "You'll see him soon. Just rest a little for now." I opened my mouth to argue some more but was interrupted by the creaking sound of the door opening. A middle-aged man in a white coat, with a stethoscope draped around his neck, strolled in. He glanced over the papers in his hands, before looking up at me. When our eyes met, he gave me a warm smile. "You're awake, Miss Wilson," he proclaimed the obvious. I forced a smile out in response. "My name is Nez. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I replied dryly, sending a glare towards Ariel, who again rolled her eyes at me. "You suffered quite the blood loss from the shot wound to your upper right thigh, and some minor injuries to the back of your head, however. Your resilience was beyond spectacular. You were very strong. And although it's perfectly normal to feel the soreness of your wounds, I could give you something to ease the pain if it turns unbearable." The doctor prodded, as if he knew I was lying about feeling fine. I rolled my eyes, biting the inside of my cheek. "I guess I could use something." He smiled, nodding once. "I will inform the nurses." "Do you remember the events of the last time you were conscious?" I gulped involuntarily, my throat suddenly restricting, and nodded reluctantly. "Are there, perhaps, any blank spots you cannot seem to fill?" I shook my head. I perfectly remembered everything that went down from the minute I woke up blindfolded in the cellar to the point where I got shot in the woods. The doctor nodded in understanding. "Very well. I shall send you a nurse to give you some medication to ease the pain." "Thank you," I whispered lowly as he began to leave the room. Once the door was closed shut, I was once again left alone with Ariel and Bella. They moved over to a couch on the right side of my bed that I had just come to notice. Ariel was the first to break the silence. "What exactly happened?" "Nora," I gulped nervously. I knew they were going to ask for answers, and I dreaded having to inform them that I ran into the last person we ever thought of seeing again. And the fact that he was the one who had ordered my kidnapping, and the fact that I shot him. I could already see them losing their minds as soon as I let those words pass my lips. But before I had the chance to answer, the door was shoved open so roughly it slammed into the other side of the wall. We all jumped, Ariel letting out a loud shriek. Noah and Elliot stood wide-eyed. They scrambled towards my bed, Elliot instantly going to grab my hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked in a low whisper. I could detect the pain behind his tone. It nearly crushed my heart. I gave him a reassuring smile. "I'm all right. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about you. Are you out of your mind?" Noah questioned, exasperated. "I'm all right now, and that's all that matters." I reasoned. "How's Seth doing? Were you with him?" "Seth is as healthy as a horse," Elliot began to answer. But at the same time Noah spoke. He woke up dumber than before. My eyes widened as I realized the crushing possibility of no statement being true. Seth had injured his head, and I didn't only fear him never waking up, but even the possibility of him losing his memory. When Elliot noticed my fear, stricken and frozen expression, he slapping Noah in the chest. "You idiot," he scolded, then turned to me. "Don't mind him. HES just being an ass. Seth is really doing fine in fact. He almost jumped off his bed to come see you as soon as Noah came to inform us that you're awake. But we had to restrain him. He shouldn't move much." I sighed, appreciative of Elliot's honest answer. Then I glared at Noah. "Be nice to him. We almost lost him." Noah shrugged carelessly, and if the slightest movement didn't hurt my insides like hell, I would leaned over the bed and smacked him on the head for being so nonchalant. "Would you tell us what happened?" "Nora," Ariel spoke once more. I gulped the growing lump in my throat, and reluctantly nodded. I had to inform them sooner than later, and so I opened my mouth to speak the words I knew they would find impossible to believe. "It was Darius," I whispered. Elliot's grip on my hand tightened visibly, and Bella let out a slight gasp. Ariel stared at me blankly, while Noah frowned in confusion. "What?" Ariel asked, dumbfounded. When I woke up in the cellar, he was there. Ariel's eyes widened instantly. He was just as surprised to see me. He told me that he had ordered his men to kidnap who HED referred to as the new lover. But he had no idea that that lover was me. "What?" Noah suddenly exclaimed. "Did he hurt you? Was he the one who did that to your face?" Bella gushed out, her cheeks turning a light shade of red due to an unknown emotion. I nodded my head, and I saw him. "What?" Noah yelled even louder this time. I winced away from his booming voice. His green eyes were so wide and I feared they might pop out of their sockets any second. "How did you shoot him?" Elliot breathed out in disbelief. I shrugged. After I had freed myself of my bindings, we got into a bit of a fight. I got a hold of one of his men's gun, and I shot him. My heart clenched as I remembered the ice-cold feeling that washed over me as soon as I had pulled that trigger. I swallowed the growing lump in my throat. "I don't know if I killed him," I finally whispered. Ariel was quick to reach my bed, her hands coming up to grasp mine. She rubbed soothing circles on the back of them as a way to comfort me. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself. Nora, if he's dead, you did us all a favor by ridding the world of one of its monsters. I can't believe you ran into him again after all those years." Noah mumbled under his breath. His jaw clenched as he stared daggers at the floor. "Rostam," Elliot suddenly voiced out. We all turned to look at him in confusion as he stared blankly straight ahead. His vision shifted to Noah. Rostam was Darius' cousin. I had them in one of my classes. Noah's eyes widened, as if realization suddenly hit him. "Who's Rostam?" I asked. "He was the third in command that Xavier Essman killed." Noah replied. "That means it's possible Darius is the second. If we can get to him. If HE's still alive, all of this could be over with." Elliot was already back on his feet, reaching the door. "What how?" I gushed, in desperate need of answers. "We need to inform Xavier of this." "He'll know what to do." Elliot completely ignored my questions as he spoke back to Noah, who nodded and was instantly following Elliot out the door. "What just happened?" Bella asked, but I was too caught up with the wind getting knocked out of my lungs as soon as Elliot had mentioned Xavier's name. His name suddenly triggered back the memory of him standing feet away from me, his army of men ready behind his back, and me putting whatever energy I had left within me into fueling my legs to move me forwards in his direction. I saw the image of him yelling madly as soon as the shot was triggered, and I collapsed to the dirty ground, followed by the image of him commanding his men to go forth and fight. But the image that stood out the most, the image that still confused me madly, was how it appeared as though not only his men had understood his command, but so did the pack of wolves standing on guard beside him, as they also launched forward into attack. Why was it that they didn't attack Xavier? How did they know who the bad guys were? And why in the world did they only attack once the demand had been voiced? It all seemed so surreal, like the whole act was just a figment of my imagination, a result of the trauma and the abuse, but I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. Nora. A hand was waved in front of my face, snapping me out of the haze. I blinked the images away, looking up at Ariel's face as she eyed me worriedly. Are you all right? I need to see Xavier. Right now.